like you at home. So today, our presentation is about recipe modification. I would like to discuss about how to modify your recipes to make them healthier without altering your desired taste or texture in your recipe. So, this is our objectives for today, and hopefully you leave the presentation at least taking one of these tips in. And first we're going to talk about how to reduce fat, sugar, and salt by cutting them into half in the recipe. And then we'll also think about how you can incorporate more fiber in the recipes. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm going to have to ask a volunteer or more if anyone has ever read a recipe and decided, hey, I think I'd like to modify this. So any hands from a volunteer?
We changed our spaghetti instead of using hamburger meat. We buy those the soy meat, the crumblers from
Morningstar.
Yes.
All right. Nice. Anyone else? Yes.
For us, we eat sopes. So sopes are usually fried, but now we actually bake it, which sounds really good.
Oh, so you changed the cooking method, which we'll actually discuss too. So, let me move on. So as mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about how to reduce the amount of fat, sugar, and salt in the recipe and how to increase the amount of fiber. So we'll start off with fat. We usually use fat in our recipes for flavor, richness, texture, and sometimes it's hard. It's a challenge to think about how can I reduce the amount of fat because it might totally alter the entire recipe. Well, usually you start with cutting the amount of fat by half. Start slow first and then see how that would work. So, for example, if the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of butter, then you try how about 1 tablespoon of butter. Then I would also recommend use low fat or fat-free dairy products. And when you are noticing these stuff when you're looking at these like yogurt or milk. And for instance, yogurt, you want to also look at the sodium or sugar content, because they if it's low fat, chances are that sugar might just make up for the low fat content. And when you're also buying meats, and when you're going to cook the meats, you can ask to trim off the fat. And that way you reduce the amount of fat in your meats. And then you can also use egg whites, 2 egg whites in substitution for 1 whole egg. And changing the method of cooking. Instead of frying, you can bake, you can grill, you can steam or poach. Our next one is sugar. So when you are baking, for instance, use half of the amount of sugar you typically use. And then when you are also eating fruits, and especially canned fruits or those fruit salads, try to look for foods that are packed in water instead of fruits under heavy syrup, because that tends to be added sugar, and that's something you can't really control. And then also, if you're cutting back to sugar, I would suggest putting in extracts or spices that would actually add more flavor and enhance the sweetness. So examples would be vanilla extract, cinnamon, or almond extract. And lastly, try to avoid products such as added sugar or high corn fructose syrup. And lastly, our salt. So to reduce the salt, we would suggest using more herbs and spices. And that way, it adds more flavor. I know that salt is definitely one thing. It's like the one thing you have to remember to put in your dish. And so adding more herbs it actually amps up the flavor of your dish. Squeezing lemon, for instance, that would also help out. And also, some of you may have the habit of putting a salt shaker, use a salt shaker on your table, even before tasting your food. I would suggest tasting your food first, and if it needs more salt, then that's when you decide to put in more salt. That way you have more control of the salt, and also once you put it in, you can never take it out. And so the use of soy sauce, MSG, seasoned salt, or bouillon cubes, they tend to have extra sodium in it. Sodium that is packed in it because it's preserved. So if you're looking for, or also like garlic salt, for instance, or onion versus garlic powder, use garlic powder because there's no salt in there. That's just pure garlic versus garlic salt. It has extra salt added into it. All right. And now we're going to talk about increasing fiber. The reason we want to eat more fiber in our eat more fiber and add it into our recipes is because it, there's more vitamins in it. So if you want to start when you're baking, if you want, or for instance, if you're making pancakes, you want to you can substitute white wheat flour with whole wheat flour. Some of you may think that might change the taste. So if you're not used to the taste, you can cut out, have half-half. So 1 cup of whole wheat flour and 1 cup of white flour. And that way, you can. There's definitely there's no altered taste to it, but you eventually get used to the taste. And if you are adding whole wheat flour, for example, incorporating it in your baking technique, I would suggest adding more water. That way it's more moist. That way, and whole wheat flour does take up some water. And then when you're making casseroles, soups, add in more vegetables, and salads as well. Instead of, you can put to substitute for meat sometimes. For protein, you can use beans and nuts. So that would definitely add in the fiber content in your recipes. All right. So today I will let Lauren take the stage.
Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to show you how to make a recipe that is a lemon orzo salad with chickpeas added to it. So the first ingredient, this is your orzo. It is a pasta, a very small pasta. And the purpose of this recipe is to show you how you can incorporate other herbs and other ingredients into the salad rather than just adding salt to everything. So first I'm going to add the orzo. Break it a little bit so it's stuck together. Then I'm going to add, these are green onions that are thinly sliced. These over here, I'm going to pass the green onions around. You may have also seen them as shallots in the grocery store as well. So this one looks like you only use the top green portion, you don't use the white portion at the bottom. This recipe also calls for lemon juice, so you use 3 tables of lemon juice. I've pre-juiced the lemon juice. Take a little while to do that. So this is going to bring a lot of flavor to the recipe, so you don't have to add that extra salt. I'm also going to add water. This is just to help moisten the orzo because it sticks together after it's been cooked. This recipe calls for dill. Has anybody not heard dill before or ever tasted it? No? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pass around a small sample of it so you can see what it looks like. It comes on a stalk, and you just use the little leaves off of it for the recipe. If dill is not a flavor that you are accustomed to or like, you can also use something like cilantro or basil, whatever is going to cater to your particular taste. That's a really strong smell, so you might want to take a whiff of it when it around. So then we're going to add olive oil. This is a tablespoon and a half of olive oil, so it's not a lot. Then some garlic. This is also going to enhance the flavor. You want to make sure that when you do chop it up to put in here, because it is going in raw, that you want to chop it up very finely so you don't get a big piece of garlic when you're eating it, because that would not be something very pleasant, unless you like a lot of garlic. And these are the chickpeas. Can someone tell me another name for chickpeas? Garbanzo beans, yes. They're the exact same thing. So for this recipe, it calls for 1 can. We doubled the recipe. If you are not a big garbanzo bean person, you can decrease or add more to the amount to make it more suitable to what your taste is. So that's the nice thing about modifying recipes, is that you can always cater it to your particular taste. Then we're going to add some feta cheese. You want to make sure that you get the crumbled one. So it comes in a package like this. This is the Fino strand. But there's a variety of different ones that you can choose from. And lastly is salt. The recipe calls for half a teaspoon. I'm not going to add the whole amount in because the point is to decrease the amount of salt. So as you're making it, don't add the entire amount that it calls for. Add a small portion, mix it up, taste it. If it seems like it needs a little extra for flavor, add a little more. But you don't want to add the entire amount in right away. And when you purchase the garbanzo beans, you want to make sure that you get a low sodium one as well. That'll also help decrease the amount of sodium. So then you mix it all up. It's a very, very easy recipe to make. It's just, the hardest part honestly is cooking the orzo, because it takes the longest amount of time. Everything else is just chopping it up and then mixing all the ingredients in. Does anybody have any questions? The recipe is provided in your handouts for this week. No questions?
Yeah, how about rinsing the chickpeas? Well, it says drained and rinsed. You can decrease the sodium by rinsing the chickpeas, right?
Yes, that'll help too. So I just ran them through a colander, drained it all, the juice out of it, and then just rinsed them off with water, kind of move them around a little bit, so that way all of the chickpeas get rinsed with water. All right, so then we're gonna go ahead and give you guys a sample of this now.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any difference between the iodized salt and sea salt?
Yes. Iodized salt is actually, is it fortified? Wait, it's fortified with iodine, which we need in our body, and sea salt typically does not have iodine in it. Sometimes we do suggest using sea salt because you could actually reduce the amount of salt in your dishes because it's actually saltier, a lot saltier, they're chunkier actually, than iodized salt. So that's the difference.
But the other thing about the sea salt is that it has 40% less sodium chloride, so it's a little bit better for you. Same taste, but less sodium content. Yeah, and it does have trace minerals of the iodine and the other minerals and things. It's coming directly from the ocean. That's why they had to go ahead and take the other salt and add iodine to it, because it wasn't from the ocean.
So while she's serving, I'm